Hello, my lovely listener. I've got a few questions for you. I'm curious if you want to take some time before we start the show to think about them with me. First question. Do you find yourself staring at other photographers' images on Instagram and other places and wonder exactly how they capture such real and natural looking snippets of time? Are you tired of posing people and creating the same old images? Maybe that you've been creating or that you see others doing. Number 3, is your biggest hang-up that people just won't stop looking at the camera and cheesing at you when you are trying to orchestrate organic and honest expressions? Number 4, do you find it difficult to communicate how to be in the moment and instead find yourself telling your clients what to do or having them waiting for you to control their every movement? Or maybe after you've thought about all these things, maybe you're just plain tired of feeling the pressure to have every person in every photo be perfect. If you nodded in agreement to anything that I have said, my friend, I have made you something. It is called Definitely Documentary. If you've been listening to the show for a minute, you know that I'm someone who kind of stands up for what they believe in. And I believe the photography world needs more documentary photographers, particularly in the wedding and family sphere, because documentary is real, honest life as we live it. And we have got to hold fast to these moments in these people as they are. If that rings true for you, keep listening. I want to help you embrace that magic imperfectness that is the essence of what life is. So I've made a 5 video course. It's do it yourself at your own pace, lifetime access. Definitely Documentary is the definitive guide to documentary photography. This is for people who are just getting into photography. This is for people who have been in it for a bit and they're looking for a shift in their work, like the questions that I asked you at the very beginning. This is for people who are really interested in documentary photography and they don't know quite where to start. These 5 videos and a couple of little bonuses, they will take you from A to Z, teach you everything you need to know about composition, about bending the time-space continuum so that you can be in the right space at the right time, mental mindset for your clients and for yourself, and how to find your own perspective in this wild and crazy saturated world of wedding and family photography. If any of this is interesting to you, and I hope it is, click the link in the show notes. It'll take you to the website that gives you the full details. If this sounds like you, then definitely Documentary is, wait for it, it's definitely for you, my friend. It's a mini course that is fun, easy to digest, quick to walk through. I'll take you through every aspect of documentary photography to help you become more knowledgeable, more prepared, and more confident for your next session. Link is in the show notes. And now, on to the show. Hey, you. Thanks for showing up for the Tilt and Shift Photography Business Podcast. I am your host, Bobby V, and I have a wonderful person joining me today. Her name is Annemie Tonken, and you may know her from the podcast This Can't Be That Hard, which is such an excellent mantra for all of us. That phrase in and of itself spurred Annemie to do some really incredible things with her business. She's a family photographer, and as I said, she's a podcaster, but she's also a educator, and her education offerings are incredible. Their system is called the Simple Sales System. So you can get a sense of what Annemie's intention is in creating work and education for her people. So I will link to all of that in the show notes and you'll hear more about it in this podcast. But I just want to give the heads up that I really super loved talking with Annemie, and we talk about, of course, a big shift that happened in her life that brought her to these educational provisions that she has available that you need to check out. But we also talk about personality, and we talk about art, and we talk about a couple of mind expanding ideas that I really want you to listen in for. So thank you for being here. And here is Annemie.
It's better than the horrible, like crappy wall that's behind it. So,
You know, it's so fun being on, because just the shift in reality that happens when we zoom in on like a nice portraiture and like, hi everybody, I'm talking with Annemie Tonken, and she's got a pink background, and I was just talking about how it's reflecting on my face. So if you're watching the video on YouTube, I look even a little more flushed than usual, but then Annemie said how it doesn't look like that behind there, and what these wonderful zoom ins that we can do, to kind of give us a little alternate reality.
well, I mean, as photographers, we're masters of cropping, right?
I know. Crop your shit.
Reality, but this is what I want you to see. That's what we do, not just through our cameras, but on
Yeah.
Instagram and everything else.
Yeah.
So here I am in this like 8 by 8 foot horrible box of a like tomb for recording podcasts, and I've got
Yeah.
like the drop ceiling. It's so ugly. It's just an office building.
Yeah.
But what you see is like clean
Yeah.
background because that's the way I framed it.
And it looks great. You chose that.
Oh,
I'm like, fuck it. I am like, this is where I'm at. Which says everything about how I shoot, right? Like, I'm documentary.
yeah,
I'm like, yeah, I want you to be honest with me. So
yeah,
here's my photos on my back wall that I haven't changed in probably 10 years.
right. Do
And
as
like
I
my
say, not
dying
as I do.
my dying ficus plant, which
Oh,
I mean, it's not dying. It's been here for like, I think like my husband brought it into the relationship, and so it's, I think it's like 30 years old or something.
and those things are pretty indestructible.
Not in love with it though. I'm just, it's in here because, but it's it's going to be in everyone's life forever because it's in all of these recordings.
That's right. That's right. The well documented houseplant.
Exactly.
Love it.
Hey, that kind of brings up an interesting question that I have for you. What because I think about this a lot from the reason I like lean so hard into documentary is because I'm an Enneagram 8.
Hmm.
So I have like this sense of morality or like justice, like crusade that like I have to like make the world better, or
Sure.
whatever that means, right? And I'm also a contrarian, so if there's a way to do something, I'm like, no, I'm doing it differently.
Hmm.
But with my like um impulse or my desire for the greater picture for
Hmm.
documentary is that we live in a world that is so constructed
Hmm.
that I want to lean on hard into like the honest, real,
Yeah,
messy, beautiful, like I don't want to fabricate anything because we spend so much time not like detaching from what is actually
sure.
real, right? um what responsibility do you think that, and this is a lot about me asking if it's a responsibility,
Yeah, yeah.
do photographers have in the world, the greater world that we're constructing?
Oh man.
I just
Here's
dropped
a
a
can of
huge,
worms.
a big lobber on you, Anne.
No, no, I love that. And I mean, you're asking the person who has like the fake pink background.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I know, and that's exactly why I'm asking, right? It's like
Yeah.
it's so different.
Well, and it's actually it's funny because even though I have this here, it's only because the wall behind it is like nobody would want to look at that on a regular basis. It's not because and in fact in my photography work, I would not call myself a documentary photographer by any stretch. Like if somebody is, going to play with their kid and I'm going to make photos of it, I'm like, how about we scooch over here toward this window instead of sitting in the dark hallway?
Right.
But other than that, I am all about it being an authentic interaction and all that sort of thing. Like I'm not I lean more toward the documentary end of things. Whether I think that that is, I mean, I could sit here and make an argument for it as a like a higher calling and sort of a purpose driven, I am showing you the beauty in your everyday, as
Mhm.
opposed to this need to sort of like Pinterestify your life or,
Ooh, I like that
whatever.
word. Interestify.
I just made that up. because I'm sure
Writing it
everyone can
down.
tell.
Pinterestify. Even like
But
the stress on the second syllable.
yeah,
Pinterestify.
yeah. Um, that it is, so there are days when I feel like it's like a calling, it's a thing that we need to do. And then there are other days when I'm just like, because I think that we spend a lot of our time judging ourselves and
Mm,
judging our lack of like meeting some, bigger standard. And I do think that there's something really beautiful about being able to show someone that's not all it's cracked up to be, or it's not needed to
mhm.
have that sort of to recognize the beauty in that every day. So I'm with you. And it's funny, I'm an Enneagram 3, which I
Uh-huh.
think if I had to pick an Enneagram, I would pick anything other than 3. Like I look at 3 and I'm like, what a cheesy personality. Like, hey, everything's a sale and let me tell you about this and da da da, like song and dance. I have like Enneagram jealousy about other people's personality types, but I mean, it's hilarious. I remember when I first took the Enneagram and saw my results, I was like, I felt so exposed. Like
Yeah.
someone was like, "Oh yeah," like I think I'm some sort of weird 3 archetype, but
Mm,
for better for worse, right? And
yeah.
so I actually it's one of those where I sort of aspire to, or not aspire to, I really try to intentionally slow down and stop like putting the best face on everything all the time and think about like, well, what are the motivations here? And I do feel pretty strongly at the end of the day that as a family photographer, which is what I do, that it is a bit of a, I don't want to call it a responsibility, because you can be an artist for all kinds of reasons. You can be
Mhm.
an artist who creates totally false beauty, and that can be its own statement. I think it
Yeah.
just depends on what statement you're trying to make.
Yeah. Ding 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 ding. Whoa, like air horn. I need an air horn like sound
Sound
effect.
effect.
Well, you brought
uh,
up a couple of things in there. You also, so I want to just like put a pin on that because I want to come back to that because this is something that has come up regularly with my guests, just like organically, whether or not we're artists.
mhm.
So let's come back to that. And I'm going to try to remember the other thing because that just fell out of my head.
I totally
Um,
get that.
well, you said that you are a family photographer, but that is not all
Mm.
you are.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, so no, with Enneagram 8 is what Enneagrams. Okay, so you said that you had Enneagram jealousy, and I also had Enneagram jealousy because
Oh, funny.
when I did it, I was like, oh my God, like
Yeah.
I don't want to be the 8 because the 8 is always the kind of like the like harumph in the room that like, well, what about this? Or
Uh-huh.
the one who is sort of I think of like a healer. Are you very familiar with dog breeds?
Somewhat, yeah.
Okay, so the healer
Mm-hmm.
is like a sheep herder, and like they
Mm-hmm.
nip at the heels of
Yep.
to get them moving, and that's what the immediate like impression in of Enneagram 8s that I had. I'm also a Virgo, so
Mm-hmm.
there's some like serious like analytic uh less emotional aspects of
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
personality. Like
Yeah.
control. And
Yeah,
so I
yeah.
felt like really I was like, I don't want to be an 8. Just less like, but the cool thing about it, and this is like a promotion for Enneagram analysis, I suppose, if anybody hasn't done it before, the thing that's so cool about it is that it helped me to like understand
Yeah.
more about myself and my communication style and my motivations. And also like with that self-awareness, which is a piece
Mm.
that a lot of us miss, having that self-awareness is like helps you to like understand the reason that you're reacting to something the way you are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And with that you have the ability to have like more agency in how you're responding. Like if my impulse is to like nip someone's elbow because they're not like moving fast enough,
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, okay, that comes from like my whatever psychological makeup I have,
Yeah.
and I don't have to do that,
Right.
you know.
Well, and the other thing, so, and I am by no means an Enneagram expert at
Nor
all,
am I.
but um, just let's put that out there. But when I first took it and when I started, reading about what the results mean and all that sort of
Yeah.
stuff, the thing that I like about Enneagram that is different from other personality type tests that I have seen before
Yeah.
is this idea that no matter what your personality, what your number is, you have there's this spectrum of like when that person is, and I can't even remember the language they use, but when they are in like a bad place mentally, when they're under
Right.
stress, or they are sort of in a less, we'll call it evolved version of themselves,
Yeah.
these are the ways that that shows up. Versus when you are sort of operating as your best self, then this shows up in these much more flattering ways,
Yeah. Yeah.
much more productive ways. And so I think that was really helpful because when I think about how I react in certain situations and things like that, I can say, or I can see, oh, this is because I am feeling attacked, or I'm being defensive, or I need to get more sleep at night, or whatever the case may be. I can
Mhm.
sort of see that, okay, this is just, I'm not handling this as well as I could, even if I'm being true to myself and not, trying to be you.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Absolutely.
I we all love navel gazing to a certain amount, right? To a certain degree, where it's
Isn't that
like,
what this
oh, I'm
is all
gonna
about?
learn about myself here. Yeah, exactly. We're podcasters. Come on. Is there any higher version of listening to oneself talk? But yeah.
Love
Anyway.
the sound of my voice.
Yeah, that took some getting used to.
Yeah, and on that topic, yes, you are a podcaster. Your podcast is This Can't Be That Hard, which is, I love it. It's
Oh, thanks.
so approachable in terms of realistic things that you can do for your photography business, and the conversations that you have with folks they're constructive, and they're still interesting.
Oh, thanks.
You know what I mean? Like
Trying to keep
sometimes,
it real. Yeah.
well, we can get into these um and I like, again, I sort of resist and pull against like telling people what to do,
Yep. Same.
because it's in people often want to be told what to do because it seems easier, I think, or it seems like it like takes away the responsibility, or maybe there's some
Sure.
safety in there, like
Yeah.
thinking that if this person tells me how to do it, then maybe I won't fail, maybe is
Or
what's
if I
happening
do
in the
fail,
background.
it's on them, not on me.
Totally.
I mean, there's both. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and that implies that there's a right and a wrong way to do something.
Yep.
And I hope that the way that I coach folks, like my intention is to kind of be an alternate perspective of that, because there's so much black and white, right and wrong, good and bad,
Hmm.
that we need to empower our students and anybody listening, like that there is no right or wrong, there is no good or bad, there are options, and your success and your satisfaction and your sustainability is going to come out with you knowing that you have options and understanding that you get to choose. Like, this is your business, you can do whatever the f you want, and there's
Hmm.
a million different ways to do it. um yeah.
Yeah. I that resonates so much with me. And I've been teaching, or whatever you want to call it, for I've been in the education space for coming up on 5 years. And over the course of that time, I have really spent a fair amount of time thinking about the weird push and pull of this. People kind of want to be told what to do.
Yeah.
I see some other people in the education space who are very successful from what we can tell on the outside, which I'm always like,
Mhm.
remember, you have no idea.
Yeah.
So I'm going to,
Sidebar.
with the caveat that, like, of course, I'm not looking at these people's bank accounts or whatever
Yeah.
by certain metrics, number of followers and whatever. It seems like they've got big followings and lots of people listening to them.
Yeah.
Almost all of those people who are what I would call like the rock stars of the education world. And I'll even expand that beyond photography. If we're talking about like Tony Robbins or somebody like
Right.
that, they almost have like a cult leader type. Um, the super successful ones, there's
Yeah.
this cult of personality thing
Yeah.
going on where people are just like, just tell me what to do, and they
Yeah.
really have leaned into that prescriptive. This is how you do it. Follow these steps, and I feel. You want to talk about like a moral responsibility? I actually feel
Mhm.
this moral responsibility to do exactly what you were talking about, which is to say, like, look, especially because the people that I am seeking to teach are creatives. Like they, it's not only, I believe we're all creative to some degree, but like these are
Totally.
people who
Yeah.
have like built businesses on their creativity. And so the last thing that I want to do is be like, here you go, color inside the lines. Like
Yeah.
that's really not, I don't, I feel like that's inappropriate in some way.
Hmm.
But we have a limited amount of creative energy to use. We are naturally programmed to be better at certain versions of it and not as good at other versions. And a lot of people who are in the, like, the, you know, we'll call it just photography, like the, as photographers, a lot
Hmm.
of them tend not to have a lot of natural instinct around running a business, which is
Yeah.
fine. There's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with that. So I do feel like if I can do some of the heavy lifting and be like, here,
Hmm.
if this
Yeah.
resonates for you, if this feels good, feel free to color in my coloring book. You can color outside the lines, but like here's some constraint for you. Because I do feel like the blank page
Hmm.
is it's a lot.
Daunting.
Daunting, sure.
Yeah.
And therefore sometimes people will just be like, never mind. I'm just going to run a really bad business that's not serving me or anybody else because I don't
Yeah.
want to put in the time, which I
Yeah.
get.
Yeah. How can people get into your sphere? How
Oh,
to connect?
yeah. So the podcast is a good way. This can't be that
Yeah.
hard. You listen to me talk all day long. And if you want to watch it on YouTube, you'll see this pink background. Yeah. So that's
Okay.
probably the best way.
Well,
It's all things. This can't be that hard.
yes, which is such a great title. I love it.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
really good. You said you've been in this space for about 5 years.
Hmm.
So, what happened 5 years ago that you got into the education space?
Oh gosh. That was sort of a confluence of events. I have been a photographer in business as a photographer since 2010. In 2017, I got divorced. I was at that point, in 2016, I co founded a conference with two family photography friends of mine called The Family Narrative. And
Hmm.
we started hosting that on an annual basis. And when we created that conference, there was none of the three of us were intending to be like the teachers. We were going to hire people to come and be sort of the instructors. And then we were more facilitating the conference. But a couple years in, I had the opportunity to give a talk and I really enjoyed that process. And
Hmm.
so that sort of like was the thing that gave me the like, ooh, maybe this is something that I could see myself getting into. And then at the same time, I had oh man, this is a big long story. The short version of the story was I use PicTime for my gallery software, online gallery software. And
Yep.
the creators of PicTime were seeing some of the results I was getting for online gallery sales. And they had approached me about like, how are you getting these results? And so they wanted to work together to create an app in their platform to sort of help other photographers get similar results. And that I was like, oh, I could teach about the process that I use. And so officially, when I launched, I guess the education business was started with what I would call my signature system, which is the simple sales system. And that was,
Hmm.
yeah, in the beginning of 2020.
Did anything happen before that that made that like I'm leading I'm leading on my
What is it that you wanted to talk about? Yeah, no.
there's
Well,
something that I want to talk to you about.
yeah. And I'm excited to talk about it, which is a totally different topic. Sorry, guys, you're going to have to follow us down the rabbit hole here. Um,
Honestly, I love it. I love like where are we going? And then just like grabbing
well,
someone's hand and then like
yeah. Yeah,
let's go.
totally. I was like, does she want me to answer with the other answer? Because that's a different answer. Yeah, no. So, well, you know what though? There's a common
They're
theme, which
related.
is that several times in my business, I started my business. I didn't know anything about running a business. I was a nurse
Hmm.
before. I was like, how, someone tell me how to run this business. I needed a
Totally.
prescription
Yeah.
so that I could quit my job and do
Yeah.
this full time.
Yeah.
So I was able to make that happen. But along the course of the last 14 years, I have had several situations where like there was a problem and there was not an apparent solution, and I had
Mm.
to like create one, right? And so
Yeah.
I, in retrospect, can look back and say my creative superpower. I mean, I think I'm a good photographer, but I actually think my creative superpower has to do with the business side of things,
Yeah.
and sort of finding creative solutions to problems. And so the story that I believe you want me to tell is so I had gotten, like I said, divorced in 2017. And that was like a major shock to my
Yeah.
system,
Yeah.
obviously. Like my finances changed, my responsibility. I have two kids, like my responsibility for parenting was different. And so I had to make a lot of big shifts in my business. And I finally felt like I got my feet under me,
Mm-hmm.
and then one of my feet started hurting. I was having this like ankle pain, chronic ankle pain, and I went to see an orthopedist, and they did an MRI, and they were like, okay, looks like this. I had sprained my ankle really badly in high school, and they were like, it looks like you did some damage. We can go in and clean that up for you. So it's just cartilage, like whatever,
Yeah.
something gross, scraping, bleh. And and if you want to schedule that for like schedule it for a time when you can take a couple of weeks off your feet. And so I was like, great, December 7th, 2018, let's put
Yeah.
it on the books, because that's, I will have finished my busy season of work, and then I'll take a couple of weeks where, my mom can come stay with me and help me out with the kids and all that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I wake up from the surgery, and they're like, well, funny story. We got in there and your ankle was a total mess. It was way worse than we saw on the imaging. And we ended up doing reconstructive surgery on your ankle. Like, we thought
Oh.
we were going to do this one thing, but my dad was actually the one who came for my surgery. Your dad gave us permission to like do this more complicated surgery, which was the right call. Like, I
Yeah.
would have wanted it just like I wouldn't have wanted to schedule a follow up surgery.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to do that
Yeah.
twice, right? But what that meant was instead of 2 weeks off my feet, they were like, you're going to be
Yeah.
non weight bearing, so off your foot entirely for 3 to 4 months. And so I, thankfully, it was like the slowest season of my business is Q1, right?
Yeah.
But it meant I had zero income for 3.5 months while I was going through PT and paying medical bills. It was awesome. So
Wow.
that was a giant wake up call for me, because I think as photographers, we all, and like independent business owners and all this other stuff, we all recognize that there is a risk to, if something
Mm-hmm.
were to happen, even if you were to like fall and sprain your wrist or something. I mean, our
Yeah.
cameras are heavy.
Yeah.
And it's a big thing to work around. I needed to be able to walk in
Yeah.
order to do my job effectively as a family photographer. And so I was like, okay, as a single income earner in my household, it is irresponsible of me to not have some kind of backup plan for this kind of eventuality. Obviously, any of us could get hit with like a major life quake type of thing, but
Mm-hmm.
a sprained ankle or a sprained wrist or something like that, that could happen anytime.
Yeah.
And so I need to build something into my business that stabilizes this, or I need to like have an alternate source of income altogether
Mm-hmm.
that I can rely on. So I'm like, trying to figure out what I'm going to do. I'm figuring it out. And then one day the doorbell rings, and it's the UPS guy, and he's dropping off my HVAC filter, which I have a
Mm-hmm.
subscription for.
Mm.
Because I had once upon a time forgotten to change the filters long enough that my 3 dogs ruined my air conditioner, and it was a really expensive fix. And the guy,
Guys.
when he came to fix it, he was like, well, if you had changed your air conditioning filters, this wouldn't have happened. And I was like, okay, note to self. And he told me, he was like, there's a subscription that you can sign up for where they send them to you every couple of months, whatever.
Yeah.
So I signed up for that. So I hobble over to the door. The UPS guy hands me this box for the thing. And all of a sudden this light bulb goes off. And I was like, you know what? Every
Yeah.
time that one of my family clients calls, the ones that I've worked with for years,
Yeah.
they call and they say, oh my gosh, we have been meaning to call you for the
Yeah.
last fill in the blank, 2 years, six
Yeah.
months, whatever. But life gets in the way. And this happens. I have that same conversation over and over again. What
Yeah.
if I gave my clients the same opportunity as this air conditioning filter business
Mm-hmm.
gave me, which is set it and forget it. Like, you pay auto draft on your credit card, and
Hmm.
you get a photo session with me every year. So we'll have continuous documentation of your family over time, and I will have continuous money coming into my bank account.
Yeah.
So that was the idea. It was a little more complicated to put together than I initially gave it credit for.
Yeah.
There's like legal pieces to it, and like how do you take money on a recurring basis, and how does, all those kinds of little
Hmm.
things. So I figured that out, and I decided I was going to launch in August of 2019 because that was like leading up to my busy season, and I was like, this will be a good time. People are, getting ready for back to school. It's just a good time of year. So I launched, and I,
Hmm.
in that first pass, I think it was 32 members that I had sign up, and they were all paying me somewhere in the neighborhood of, let me see, when I first started, I have multiple tiers, like options in the membership. And I think when I started, it was like $35 a month was the minimum, or 30 and 50 was the maximum or something. So 30, let's call it 30 people times 40. Oh boy, now I'm going to trap myself into doing math. $40 each a month. It
Yeah.
was, I had a nice little chunk of change coming in on,
Hmm.
I called it payday.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
was like Stripe would light up my inbox, and that was great. So then I had, not only was it nice from a cash flow perspective, but it was also nice because I knew I was going to be working with those people that year.
Hmm.
So I was able to kind of adjust my marketing at the same time.
Yeah.
And the next spring, obviously, we all know what happened in March of 2020. Um, and when all of my photography friends were sweating bullets, like, I don't, all my work just dried up. Um, Obviously, I wasn't going and making photos of those people, but they were already paid in. And so they were like, okay, we'll just postpone until this summer. So I had a busier summer than I had spring.
Right.
But it was a lifesaver because, again, I was the only person earning money in my family, and if that had completely dried up, it really would have been,
Yeah.
I think, the 1-2 punch of the ankle surgery and then the pandemic would have been enough to probably drive me out of business,
Yeah.
if I hadn't had that. So that was kind of the tale of how I turned a bad thing into a good thing.
Is that a theme in your life, Anime? Are
I
you
feel like maybe, isn't it
yeah.
kind of how, I was going to say how we all do, but maybe that's an Enneagram 3 thing.
I
I'll bring it back to
wouldn't
my personality type.
I think we like um making this was more than making lemonade out of lemons though. This was something that was highly structured, and it you would have known how wonderful it was even if there wasn't a pandemic. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I would like to think that I could have lived my full life without a pandemic and it would have been great.
but
I guess
like
we'll
being
never
able
know.
to kind of think on your feet. And what I hear in that story is you were problem solving before the big problem came. And like that's how problems
Mm,
work, right? Like
right.
we don't acknowledge like the smaller problem.
Hmm.
And then suddenly the slightly big problem or the very big problem becomes like even astronomically more huge, right?
Yeah.
So do you see in your students, is do you think that that is something that is like teachable?
Mhm.
The ability to like, I guess it's kind of the ability to problem solve, like to pre anticipate, like, where would I be if I could do something slightly different,
Yeah.
or like,
That's a great question. I'd like to think that it's a teachable thing. I have two teenagers, and so so I'm regularly like, think this through all the way to its potential ends.
it's not
Um,
possible
they
with
don't
their
they don't
brains.
always listen. But I do think that it is an important skill to work on as a business owner,
Yeah.
and honestly as an adult, because like we I think there was a fair amount of, certainly the timing aspect of that ankle surgery and all that sort of stuff, and then the
Mhm.
pandemic, there was luck involved for me, pure
Mhm.
like total luck. it helps me illustrate the point in a way that I think is relatable to people because everyone went through the pandemic.
Right.
And that was something that no one could have had, like, none of us individually had any ability to prevent that from happening.
Right.
Versus, somebody could be like, well, I am not going to get divorced. That was another, like
Yeah.
I said, like major left turn in my
Yeah.
business.
Well, I was just going
Well,
to ask you, you did the
yeah,
same, your same pattern of thought came
yeah.
when you got a divorce, right?
Yeah. And so I guess that is kind of the way it's not that I think that I am like, well, this situation sucks. Let's see how we can make it better. But I mean, honestly, just from a practical
Yeah.
perspective, it's like, oh, I if I don't figure this out, I'm going to have to quit. And that
Yeah.
motivation of like, I really love what I do and I
Mm-hmm.
want to keep doing it, has been the thing that has pushed me. And I do. I mean, you mentioned the name of my business is This Can't Be That Hard. I have said that to myself. I can't even tell you how many times, not just related to photography, but many times related to photography, where I'm like, come on, like, this is not a complicated business proposition.
Right.
Why does it feel so hard? But let's open the curtains and be like, nope, we're gonna get creative about this. And I
Mm-hmm.
do feel like I have a certain amount of just in I don't know, inherent or like part of who I am is, well, let's roll up our sleeves and figure this out.
Yeah.
And so I do, for the people who like learning from me, I feel like that I've seen that then turn around and like inspire other people to do the same thing. And at the
Mm-hmm.
end of the day, that's the part that I love because I feel like all these amazing artists out there,
Mm-hmm.
so many of them fail, not
Yeah.
because they're not great artists, but because they're just like business is hard and like stuff does come up. So I'm all about like, let's systematize it, let's make it as easy as possible. It's kind of like automating your funding your retirement, right? So like
Mm-hmm.
if I have to write a check every week for $100 and deposit that into my thing, it's never going to happen. But if I can just auto
Mm-hmm.
draft that and get it going and I don't even
Yeah.
think about it,
Yeah.
that's great. That's the way your photography business should work. There should be all the pieces that don't require your constant focus, i.e., everything outside of the actual making of art,
Mm-hmm.
can and I think should be outsourced, automated, or at least systematized so that you don't have to put a lot of extra thought into it each and every day because it
Yeah.
burns you out over time. Even the stuff that feels small, when you're doing it every single day, it adds up.
Yeah. Yeah. And we can get so distracted by it as well.
Yeah,
You know,
totally.
if it's not something you like doing, you can get so frustrated by it.
Yeah,
That's my response. I'm like, yeah. Like I just get
totally.
so, and then I know that like, oh, this is a thing that I should not be doing because
Absolutely.
this is not how I want to feel,
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Frustrated, or even just that sense of like dread about like, oh boy, I have to sit down and like go through my books, reconcile my credit card account or whatever. Those
mhm.
things that we procrastinate about, I feel like that's like the first red flag of, okay,
Yeah.
great, let's get that off your
How
plate.
do I automate this? Exactly.
Yeah.
You had also mentioned the case of being of artistry, of us being artists.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So there are I've had to like it's interesting that this keeps coming up. So I think it's something that I want to really dig into.
Yeah.
Um, there are lots of photographers who, for multiple reasons, won't call themselves artists. Have you encountered that?
Oh, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
What do you think of that? Why are we artists? Why would we not be?
Oh, man. I think that artists are uh, an extremely reluctant bunch. I feel like I'm an unusual artist. Like an Enneagram 3 is an unusual artist because for me, it's
Mhm.
easier to be like, sure, I'm an artist. Or, like,
Yeah.
great, give me a title. I'm gonna like step into that. I feel like many of the people that I consider to be my very best friends, but like people in this industry struggle with the like claiming that title.
Yeah.
And they struggle with it way harder than anyone on the outside would struggle to name them that, right?
Exactly.
Um, and so I don't really have um, artists are not, this is not like, you don't have to have a degree for it. You don't have to
Hmm.
have, there's literally zero barrier to entry outside of your own brain.
Hmm. It's
So
that
it's really,
prescription. Actually, we were earlier
yeah,
mentioning prescription, right? Like
yeah,
we want there to be parameters. Like if you're an engineer,
permission
there's
or,
you
yeah,
have a like this, you went through this thing and now you're an
letters
engineer,
by your name.
you know?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
That doesn't exist
Yeah.
anymore.
So I feel like with artistry, it's sort of, I think the thing to do is to acknowledge that like anyone can call themselves an artist. And I actually feel
Mhm.
like in the looser definition of art, we are all artists. Like we are all
Yeah, I
creators
totally agree. Yeah.
of one kind or another.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. And so I actually feel like the people who struggle with this tend to also be the people who struggle with pricing their work appropriately and things like that. And
Yeah.
it is all about like, there is no permission for this. If you're looking for
Yeah.
permission, ping me in my inbox. I'll give you permission without ever looking at your work or anything else.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the people who will validate your
Hmm.
choice to start a business as a photographer are the people who are willing to pay you reasonable
Yeah.
money to do what you do.
Yeah. Yeah. I had one of my students ask me, uh, is this for, she had just done a session. She's like, is it worth this much? And I'm like, did they pay for it?
Mm,
She's like, yeah. And I'm like, well, then it's worth that much. Like,
yeah.
and this is a really hard concept because again, it's not prescriptive, right?
Right.
Like you, if you can get somebody to pay for what you're offering, that is how much it's worth. Like this,
Hmm.
there's no like, because we have so many people who are like, well, I haven't been doing this for long enough and I haven't like, I don't have this skill, I don't have this award, I don't have, they look for all the reasons why they're not something
Hmm.
or why they shouldn't charge something instead of asking like, what am I providing, and
Hmm.
how much money do I want to make? Like
Yeah.
there's so many people that don't ask that question as well. And it can provide so many answers, but it comes down like we don't ask that question because we want there to be a prescription as
I
to
also think we don't ask that question or we aren't willing to make that statement because we're afraid of like the guys with the clipboards showing up and being like,
totally.
"Well, nope, you're not." And those people don't exist. Like there's no
They don't
art police.
exist. There
And
isn't.
if there were, I can think of some really famous artists who would be in big trouble because like, and this is actually one of my favorite things to recommend to someone who's struggling with that idea. I'll say to them, okay, can you think of someone out there who's making a lot of money as an artist, as a photographer, whatever, who you think does terrible work? And
Hmm.
the answer is always yes, right? Like we
Yeah.
can all think of that person. I mean, I'm thinking of that person for me right now who is this like guy in my hometown who has always had a studio and like his stuff is so cheesy. Like it's so terrible and cheesy. And he racks up all kinds of like people come and pay him a lot of money, um, which is great. Like
Yeah.
beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's clearly figured out how to sell what he's offering. And therefore, to your point, it's worth that. It's worth that to
Yeah.
somebody.
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
worth that to me, but
Yeah. Well, yeah, I hope that this gives people a little bit of like a little bit of freedom in
yeah.
terms of this. That's why we're in this, right? We want freedom. We want freedom of time. We
Right.
want freedom of creation. Like we want to be able
Mhm.
to create what we want. And I think like that is why most people want, like they also have this calling, like they want to make photos with this thing. Like
Right, right.
you have that
Yeah.
feeling. But with that, there's also we choose this path because I'm in charge of my time. And
Mhm.
I get to pick whether or not I take this client or, but when you start a business, there becomes all this because it involves money, which
Yeah.
means survival,
Right.
all of these like lizard brain fears
Mhm.
come in because we interpret a client saying no with I'm going to lose my house,
Yeah.
which is the exact like mantra that I've had in my head up until like probably 7 years ago. I was like, well, this is they're not going to pay me this, and now I'm going to lose my house. Like my brain just
Yeah.
went from like black and white, right? There was
Yeah.
no if that doesn't happen, this is going to happen. And that's such a dangerous way to think. And a lot of us think like that without even realizing it, right? So, sorry,
I'm
go
going to
ahead.
pull it back to the Enneagram thing. Now you hooked me in on that conversation. I feel like that is when we were talking about like when you're in your best sort of headspace versus your
Mhm.
worst headspace. Money is something that for so many of us instantly, it's like a very quick path to get to our like scared, reactive,
Yeah.
unevolved selves, right?
Yeah.
And I think that if we can take a moment to
Mhm.
recognize, like, oh, I'm having these feelings that are coming surfacing, feelings of fight or flight, feelings of, being judged. The men with the clipboards are coming, whatever.
Mhm.
Whether it's about money, whether it's about calling yourself an artist, whatever, if you can hold space for the fact that like that's really hardwired and it's pulling us into not our best selves, and then say, okay, if I weren't panicking when I looked at the, pricing calculator and realized I needed to triple my prices,
Yeah.
if I weren't panicking, how would I feel about this? And it's a, and that's the other thing that I always, when it comes to pricing in particular and money around charging for your work, if you don't believe in your prices, no one else
No
will.
one else will. Yeah,
And it's not
exactly.
like you have to go with a megaphone and be like, I think this is way too much money to charge. Like they can hear it when they're like looking at your
Totally.
website. They can hear it like you
Yeah.
were had a megaphone. And
Yeah.
yeah, so I feel like it's an important thing for us to kind of have our own little come to Jesus meetings with ourselves
Hmm.
about like, this is not me trying to swindle someone. I am just trying to run a business and make a profit and put food on the table and keep my house and all that sort of thing. It's not
Yeah.
about greed or anything else. And
Yeah.
then instead of focusing on like, I need to be a much better photographer, in many cases, you need to be a
Mm.
better marketer and salesperson.
Air horn.
Yeah.
It
uh,
very much comes down to that. And that can ease so many of the panic worries
yeah.
that we get that devolve into like um self, like it's my fault and I'm not worth it, and like all of that. It's not. It's like, let's look at your business. Like,
Yeah.
let's look at how this works instead, rather than thinking about like I suck and people hate me, which
Right.
is where we can go, right? When we're
We
thinking
definitely
that.
do.
Um Again, the question fell out of my head because I got so caught up in what you were saying. I need to write these things down. I'm noticing a pattern. Look at me noticing patterns and trying to
Hey,
problem solve
that's right.
for
You could systematize it. That's okay. I do that all the time. I like lose my train of thought, whatever. I've just gotten better over the years at like masking it and moving on, being like, oh, I
Oh,
didn't, I,
yeah, I am not a masker.
well, come visit me in the Enneagram 3 camp anytime you want.
I'm like, this is the way it is.
Yeah.
Fun. Well, Anime, this has been like a very delightful conversation. I have
Likewise. Yeah.
loved
So
talking
fun.
with you. How can people find you? We said through your podcast, but
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
um, what about like what's your website?
Everything is this can't be that hard. So this can't be that hard.com. Instagram is that. I do, since we were talking about membership stuff,
Yeah.
I went ahead and made a little link to a 3-question quiz about if you are like, oh, a membership, that's an interesting idea. And it
Hmm.
will give you a sense as to how much monthly revenue a membership might add in your business. So
Hmm.
I'm just putting that at thiscan'tbethathard.com/Bobby.
Oh, beautiful. Okay,
Yeah.
we will link that in the show notes.
Oh, lovely.
And what
So
about
that
if
would
they
be
wanted
a
to?
way to to come sync up with me.
What if someone wanted to find your family photography? Where would they go?
Ah, yeah. So my photography website is megapixie.com, Megapixie. I've
Hmm.
got this pixie haircut that I've had for a long time. So,
Yeah. Speaking of haircuts, do you like? You said you've had it for a long time. How long have you had it?
The last time I grew my hair out was in 2014. So I
Uh-huh.
went back to shoulder length for about 6 months before I was
Yeah.
like, cut it back all off. But
Yeah.
I actually, the part of the reason that I named my business Megapixie was that when I started my business in 2010, it was kind of a fresh new haircut for me. And I,
Mhm.
I remember after naming the business, like 6 months later, I was like, does this mean I'm stuck with this haircut forever? My accountant still tells me I'm not allowed to write off my haircuts, which is annoying
Oh,
because I have to
come
get them
on. You
all
need
the
a new
time.
accountant.
I know. I like my accountant's conservative. I feel when I get scared about money, I'm like, oh gosh, am I going to get audited? So everything is extremely
Yeah.
like by the books all the time.
Yeah. Yeah, it has to be. Yeah, there's
Hmm.
no. That brings that same here. The I thought of getting audited is no.
And
I
when I listen to people who shall not be named on the news talk about, or like when I hear about like the way that people just swings or sweep stuff under the
Oh my
rug and they're like playing fast and loose with millions of dollars, it like gives me hives.
I know. Well, just
How
this
can you
conversation, I
sleep?
noticed myself like wringing my
I
shirt. I'm
know.
like, no, don't do that. So, friends,
Yeah,
if you've heard anything from this podcast, is get your shit in order.
absolutely. Oh my gosh. Be upfront and get buy the books on
Yes,
your money side of things. Yeah.
absolutely. Well, my friend,
Oh,
I will let's sign off, and I hope that our paths cross again.
absolutely. I'm looking forward to actually having you on my show here soon too.
Mm,
So we'll have
I'm
a
also looking
double header.
forward to
It'll be fun.
this. Awesome. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Have a great day.